This is Clark the Knife, aiming to bring you the best and most helpful knife reviews on YouTube. And this is the Hinderer XM-18 3.5 inch recurve. I'm going to spoil this review a little bit. This is my least favorite Hinderer, but it is still an exceptional knife. Let's get right into the specifications and start talking about what makes this knife great and what makes it maybe not so great. So the XM-18 3.5 inch recurve, like all Hinderers, is made in the USA. $425 for this knife. The blade is 3.5 inches long, 165 thousandths thick on the blade stock. We're going to talk about that plenty. 20 CV on the steel here, 8.25 inches long overall. This knife weighs 5.6 ounces. We're also going to talk about that. And then you've got the tri-way pivot system here. Right now, I've got it running on Teflon washers. So when you look at this knife, Hinderers are known for one thing: hard use. The XM-18 has a longer and more storied history of hard use than any other knife on the market. And you see that philosophy in everything about this knife. So these thumb studs here, for example, they are thumb studs. You can use them to flick the knife out, but they're also blade stops. Why does it make sense to have blade stops sitting against the scale like this? Well, when you put most knives under torsion like this, if I'm trying to torque it or I'm trying to twist it, the vulnerability is at the pivot. The pivot in a lot of blades is going to fail before the blade steel necessarily does. These blade stops transfer that torsional force from the pivot, which is relatively weak to that stuff, to the scales, which now are in compression. So that makes it much, much more robust against those forces. This handle grip here, this handle with this big old blade stop, or this big old finger guard here, and by the way, that's your flipper tab turning into a finger guard. When your hands are in this position, they are not moving. You got big fat jimping up top here. You got a big finger guard, a big front finger groove. You got more jimping back here. You grip your XM-18 like this and it ain't gonna budge. And there's all sorts of little details which we'll go through over the course of this review, but honestly, the reputation that an XM-18 has is that this is a knife for your EMTs, your firefighters, your forest rangers, your first responders, law enforcement officers, all those sorts of people that need to put their knives through hell and make sure that they keep working. The XM-18 is built for that, and it has so many examples through the knife community of putting up with the hardest use you can imagine and coming out on top. When we look at the blade on this one, this is a beautiful recurve. Hinderer puts a really nice stone wash on their blades here. You can see all the little stone marks, really crisp grind lines here. Recurve, for those of you who don't know, means you've got this sort of sway here. What's the point of a recurve? Well, when you're doing like a drag cut, let's say that I've got a little, rope here and I'm pulling past it, you'll get caught in that curvy part of the blade here, and this part will slice really, really well on pull cuts. Recurves can be super slicey. You've got a relatively shallow flat grind because this is a saber grind. And by the way, that 165,000 stock gets carried all the way out to almost this tip here. So this ends up being a thick blade all the way down to the edge. We already talked about these blade stops here, which again are thumb studs as well. You can see they're very nicely designed thumb studs. You got 3 little notches here, and then your thumb stud right there, very nicely oriented relative to the pivot. The detent is strong on modern Hinderers, but once you break that detent, it cracks right out. Let's jump over to the flipper tab while we're at it. This is a super hooky flipper tab, but hooky, it does mean it's a little pokey on your finger. If that's a problem, just get tougher fingers. If you grab past this flipper tab, it will rocket out. And it honestly doesn't even take that much pressure to get this to rocket out. Hinderers used to have issues with their actions. That is a thing of the past. They no longer do. On to the scales here. G10 over titanium. And these G10 scales are more intricate than you might think at first. They are flat scales, but there's a nice even chamfer all the way around. The way they meet the titanium liners is perfect all the way around. Even in the jimping, it's perfect. There are no machining errors whatsoever. And then this texture on the top of the G10 is relatively complex and also very functional. It looks very nice. It's a distinctive Hinderer pattern, and it provides you quite a bit of grip. When you try to run your hands past it or when you're gripping it and your fingers are on it like this, it provides quite a bit of grip without being, the sort of tear up your pants feeling that you can get on Peel Ply G10. It's a really, really nice G10 texture, which Hinderer probably had to machine into this. Either that, or they've got their own sort of Peel Ply thing that they're doing it there. But anyway, it's a really nice texture. This is a really nicely machined scale. All your hardware is flush. And then we go over to our lock side. And you can see this is a titanium frame lock. Lockup is about 50%, which is typical for Hinderers. Medium lock bar tension. There's your lock bar cutout right there. You can see even some extra milling right there in the lock bar cutout. You've got your Hinderer over travel stop. You've got a clip that can be switched to either tip up or tip down. They always used to ship like this. I find the ergonomics are much better in this tip up configuration. This clip makes the knife ergonomically even better when it's here. I don't love the ergonomics nearly as much when it's tip down, or sorry, tip up. I like them better when they're tipped down like this. And then you've got your bull pivot here, which kind of like these thumb studs being blade stops. This bull pivot is designed to be better sort of against torsion than a traditional pivot. There's just sort of more points of contact there. It's just meant to be a tougher pivot. USA made, 20 CV. That's your tri-way symbol. Let's talk about tri-way for a second. So this is running on Teflon washers right now, and it has the action you would want from Teflon, which is smooth on the open, smooth and controlled, sort of glidey on the close. Because of Hinderer's tri-way system, if I want to swap this to phosphor bronze washers and have a washer action that's a little bit faster, that I can oil to get even a little bit faster and smoother, I can do that. If I want to be super fast, drop shutty, I can throw some bearings in here and it will work with all of them. And by the way, it will work great with all of them. That's what the tri-way system does. It lets you choose whatever pivot system you want in here, and the knife will work great with all three. Now let's just talk ergonomics briefly. Two grips that this knife works in. This grip here, I already mentioned a little bit before in the hard use section, but your front finger goes right behind this guard in this first groove. The rest of your fingers go into this belly right here. There's a big flat on the back, a big flat underneath. Your hand is locked in this position. It is not going to budge. You could, I could stab with this. You could try to pull it out of my hand. You could try to torque it. It is not going to move. This is one of the most secure grips you're going to find in any knife on the market. And then on top of that, you got a choke up grip here with this true finger choil, where you can pinch up, get your thumb on the back here, and get really close to the blade. Your other three fingers now, your middle finger sits in this groove. Your other two fingers fit on the other side of this little notch here. And it also feels extremely secure when you want to get up closer to the cut. Now, because these curves are so dramatic, those are pretty much the only two grips you can use. I mean, if you want to go Mall Ninja, you can. It is okay in a reverse grip. I don't know when you're going to use that. But this grip here and this grip here are really the only ways to grip your XM-18. Like pinch grips just don't really feel all that comfortable, but they are really, really good grips. So let's get into, that's sort of your overview tip to tail. I guess last thing, this hardware. You'll see this hardware is bronze, matching the bronze, the lock side. This is part of Hinderer's Make It Your Own idea, which is they also sell hardware that is anodized different colors, different finishes, even different materials, some steel, some titanium. I'm sure at some point they've done like freaking Timascus hardware and stuff like that. It lets you take your stock XM-18, swap out the scales, swap out the hardware, maybe get a different clip, get a different filler tab, whatever, just to make it look different. Hinderer calls it Make It Your Own. it's cool that it lets you do that. It gives you more flexibility. You don't have to wait for exactly what you want from a dealer. You can say find the blade shape you want, and if it's not the right scale color, you can get another scale that's the color you want. Those scales can be G10, micarta. They even make full titanium scales. They've started to make some more carbon fiber scales as well. The downside is it's super expensive. Getting this bronze hardware, he was, I think, an $86 upcharge. Getting even a single new G10 scale, I want to say it's $65 for a G10 scale. So the make it your own feature is very cool, but you can very quickly turn this $425 knife into a $600 knife when you start adding, Hinderer's own make it your own aftermarket parts to your knife. So that's what the XM-18 is. Tip 2 tail, ergonomically super, super solid. But I mean, this whole thing just screams hard use. I mean, you look at just how thick this thing is, how overbuilt it is. Let's just do a quick size comparisons. Here it is compared to your PM2. About the same length as the PM2, but you can see the blade stock quite a bit thicker, the whole knife quite a bit thicker, just far more robust and tank-like in its design, and 1.7 ounces heavier, which you feel. Compare this to your large Sebenza. Again, same length, but thicker blade stock, thicker handle material, heavier. You're going to see a theme here. Compare this to your Benchmade 940. These are both basically 3.5-inch knives, but it dwarfs the 940 in overall size, overall presence. It makes the 940 feel like a tiny knife. And Hinderer makes bigger knives than this, but the XM-18, it is a big, tanky knife, and it feels that way. So now let's get to what I like, what I don't, and what I feel neutral about. First thing, and I think people don't give Hinderer enough credit for this in 2024, and it used to not be their strong suit, but their machining is really, really impressive in 2024. If you look at how well this blade is executed, how well that stonewash is done, how clean these grinds are, how clean that laser etch is, how clean that plunge is, this nice swedge here, just the elegance of that recurve. We'll talk about function in a second, but it looks really nice. Again, this G10 machining is as clean can be. All the hardware is perfectly flush. Sometimes it needs a bit of Loctite, but it all fits so nicely. The jimping is cut super cleanly, super consistently. It's not too sharp. It's all knocked down. There's chamfers all the way around the edge of all the scales here. There's a chamfer inside your lock bar access here. You fold this up. All your machining on the lock side is just as good. This is an extremely well-made knife, and honestly, you feel it in how solid everything about this knife feels. There is not a hint of play or movement anywhere in this knife. It all fits together perfectly. And part of the testament to that is the tri-way pivot. The fact that you can take this exact same knife and it will run with a fantastic bearings action, a fantastic washer action, or a fantastic Teflon action, with each of those actions being among the best in the market for that particular pivot design. Not only is an accomplishment that Hinderer has figured out how to pull that off, but it really does show how well machined this knife is. That it can nail 3 pivots better than most manufacturers can nail 1. Which brings me to the action, which is fantastic. This detent brake is as crisp as anything out there. And by the way, if I was running this on bearings, you would see it would even be faster to fly out. And it would have, rather than this nice shake shut action on Teflon, or nice even control close, it would have a drop shut action. These flipper Hinderers are some of the most fun, satisfying, and crisp flipper actions you are going to find anywhere on the market. Again, it's a testament to how well made these knives are. The detent brake is perfectly crisp. It's got nice acoustics, a nice thwack when it opens, and depending on the pivot you've got in there, it's exactly what you would want from that particular pivot's action. Toughness, This, I mean, honestly, I can defer to the history of the XM-18 even more than my particular experience. Everything about this knife looks tough, feels tough. But the real testament is the fact that there have been so many people that have used the XM-18 in emergency situations that are harder than anything I hope I ever have to do in my entire life. And the XM-18 has held up to the greatest abuse that you could imagine a knife being subjected to, short of, trying to lift an oil rig with one. This is as tough a knife as just about anything on the market that isn't overbuilt. Some would argue this even is overbuilt. But this is a supremely tough knife, and it feels supremely tough with how locked in these ergonomics are, how just thick and robust everything feels. It looks tough, it feels tough, it is tough. And then the ergonomics. This locked in main position here, whether I'm trying to cut through a cardboard box, try to cut through, some plant material, things like that, trying to, pull or stab into something, trying to slice through something, the knife is not going to move in my hand, and it's not uncomfortable. There's jimping that I feel. There's jimping that I feel here. There's sometimes even a bit of jimping I feel back here. But this is as secure as any knife on the market. And the choked up position, which I use more often than I always think I will, is a great way to get up closer to the cut and feels almost as good ergonomically. This flipper tab doesn't really get in the way, and honestly, it's nice to have another place to anchor this middle finger. It's really just ergonomically well designed. It's a simple ergonomic design. It's big old scoops with a big old finger guard and a sway toward the back with a blade that points pretty directly out of the pivot but slightly downward relative to the angle of your hand. It's simple, but it's executed really well, and it just works. This is an ergonomically fantastic knife with the one exception that those two grips are really all that you've got. Neutral. I already talked quite a bit about the make-it-your-own system. The make-it-your-own system is really cool. It's really cool that Hinderer allows you to swap hardware whatever way you want. But it does get really expensive really fast. I've done that with a few Hinderers in the past. I bought this one on the secondary market like this, but there have been a few Hinderers that I bought with the intent of modding them, and it is astonishing how quickly you will blow through money modifying Hinderers. So it's just neutral because I understand why it's expensive. They're making their hardware in-house. It's really high-quality hardware. The tolerances are fantastic. Anodizing takes time. But it's really expensive hardware. This is a great G10 scale. The micarta scales are equally great. There's a lot of machine work that goes into this, but they're very expensive scales. So just know, it's cool that you can do that, but just know that the second that you do that, you're not talking a $425 knife anymore. You're talking at least a $500 knife to get even a little bit of customization. And then the big negative is the cutting performance. This is the worst cutting knife that I have used in a very long time. When I got this knife, when I first received it and it had the factory edge on it, this thing literally could not perform basic cutting tasks. It struggled to open Amazon packages. It basically could not cut through cardboard. I tried using it in the garden and it would just mash everything up. I would push this against a plaid stem and it would just mash it. It wouldn't cut through, sticks. It wouldn't cut through branches, anything like that. It was terrible. Hinderers, and granted, you don't think that a blade like this is going to be a supreme slicer. Again, super thick stock with a shallow grind. It's just, that it's not going to cut well, but it cut really, really poorly. Unacceptably poorly. It was barely a knife. I then put my own edge on it. This is a 17-degree edge, so this bevel is wider than the factory bevel. This is now merely the worst performing knife that I own by a wide margin. This still struggles to cut through cardboard. I need these great ergonomics because the cardboard is pushing back so much as I try to cut it. It's a struggle to use in the garden because tasks that, I basically have to use that recurve, use those pull cuts for everything because the rest of this blade just doesn't cut all that well. and it tries to mash everything that it cuts. It's just every single time I've used this, and it's a predictable consequence. You have the blade stock and the grind. The cutting performance on this knife is terrible. And it's the reason that this is my least favorite Hinderer. I'm not even counting the Hinderer fatty versions as knives. If this is the performance I'm getting out of a standard version, the fatty versions I'm sure just don't even cut. It's like trying to use a cutting board to cut something, I'm sure. But this thing here is unacceptably bad from the factory in terms of cutting performance and merely terrible when you put a new edge on it. Which brings me to the score here. This is still, despite that cutting performance, a really, really good knife. 10 factors, 5 for fun factor, 5 for utility. First, distinctiveness, clear 9. The XM-18 is one of the most distinctive knives in the market. This is a standard bearer. If you want an XM-18, there's nothing quite like it. It deserves credit for that, and Rick Hinderer basically created a category with the hard use knife, or at least brought it to a much wider audience. It is an item of its set, like an item of one. And design, I've already talked about a lot of how this design is really smart. The way that all these notches provide that great ergonomic experiences, the brilliance of the tri-way pivot system, the smartly designed and smartly placed jimping, just the fact that you can swap everything out, and just the stone wash that they use, all of those little details. It's a really well thought out knife. This is a knife that has been iterating for many years, and it shows. It's just a very well executed design, solid 8. Action I already talked about extensively. This is simultaneously one of the best washer actions, best bearing actions, and best Teflon washer actions on the market. It is a solid 9 by giving you all of that versatility. It's such a great detent break. It's fantastic. Fit and finish I've also talked about. It's a 9. Everything about this knife is as good as you would want in a large-scale production knife. The tolerances, they're not the sort of like razor-sharp tolerances you get on something like Koenig, but everything here, there are more little machining details than you see at first glance, and every single thing you look at is crisp, detailed, and exactly the way that you would want it to be. Solid 9 for doing this at the scale that they're operating. Cool factor is an 8. This is a badass tank of a knife. It looks it, it feels it. Everything about this knife just screams, use me hard, and there's a thing that is just cool about that. Their logo is pretty damn cool as well. So that gives you 43, this is really 44 because I did math wrong, 43 points on fun factor. This is a fun knife. This is a really, really cool knife to have around. Utility cutting is a 4. Again, this is still, even after laying back the edge, the worst cutting knife in my collection. It is so frustrating to try to cut with this, and it's the reason that I don't carry it, because anytime I carry this, I have to carry another knife in case I want to actually cut things. The cutting performance sucks. Robustness is a 9, almost a 10. Track record in the history of the XM-18 shows there are very few knives that can be used harder than this one. And frankly, every part of this knife shows that there is nothing about this that will lead you to doubt its utility in any circumstance, even the hardest use. Almost a 10, but it's a 9 carry. This is a big, chunky knife. This is thick. It's 5.6 ounces, which in 2024 is pretty heavy. It wasn't quite as heavy back when overbuilt knives were really a big thing, but in 2024, this feels big, it feels chunky, it feels heavy. You really do feel this in your pocket. It's a 6. It is less pleasant to carry than most other full-size knives these days. Feel and ergos. Solid 8. Those core ergonomic grips are money. They are absolutely locked in a way that very few other knives are. It isn't higher just because your pinch grips or some of your more fine grips don't feel quite as good, and this does feel like a lot of knife for those lighter duty tasks. So, for opening up an Amazon box or something like that, pulling out something this big, this thick, this heavy, just does feel a little awkward. And then value, $425 for the level of fit, finish, and machining you're getting for what is a titanium frame lock that is really, a titanium frame here that just has G10 scales on top, with the level of finishing on this blade, with the fact that they use premium steels. $425 is very solid. And what some people have mentioned about Hinderer on the price front is that while everybody else in the knife market has been creeping up in terms of prices, Hinderer has stayed about $425 for the XM-18 for quite a while. And so while everybody else is feeling more and more expensive and you feel like you're getting less for your money, Hinderers start to feel like a better and better buy. And And so when you total all of that up, oops, sorry about that. When you total all of that up, you get 78 points for the XM-18 Recurve, which is going to be one of the highest scoring knives on my channel for quite some time. Spoiler alert, was a couple of the knives that are going to beat it though are everything else that Hinderer makes. Because even though, or at least they're going to match it, a couple of them are going to beat it, even though this design is phenomenal, even though it's a signature design, even though the ergonomics are fantastic, this is still my least favorite Hinderer by some stretch. And honestly, it just comes down to the fact that the damn thing doesn't cut. And it's not the Recurve blade shape. I've tried literally every single Hinderer XM-18 3.5 inch standard thickness blade shape. The Wharncliffe, the Spear Point, the Spanto, the Bowie, the Skinner, the Recurve. I haven't tried some of the rare ones, but nobody else has either. They all don't cut. It's that this knife doesn't like to cut things. This one cuts better than the Spanto. The Spanto is a brick. But this just doesn't cut well, and it's really hard for me to carry and use a knife that doesn't cut well. But the fact is, this is still an immaculately executed knife. It's a brilliant knife design. It is seminal for a reason. So many people love this for a reason, and don't overlook Hinderer just because, you know, you think it's just a big, stupid, hard-use knife. You think the action is still bad. You think the fit and finish is sloppy. All of that is outdated. These are incredibly well-made knives, and they do deserve to be appreciated for that. They're incredibly well-designed knives. They deserve to be appreciated for that. I will have a few other Hinderer reviews coming up. I like all those other Hinderers more than this one, but this is still a really, really good knife. Hope you found this review helpful. Hope you found it to be a good use of your time. Drop your own thoughts about this knife or anything related to this review in the comments down below. Hope to see you again soon, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye now.